Oh yeah, sexy biscuits. Nice.
Long Boys Blues, 1975. YouTubers on the rise. Reviewing games late at night and sometimes friends. But Long Boys Blues, 1975.
Hey YouTube, Longboys Post 1975, and welcome to another welcome to another nostalgic memories video of. It's been absolutely yonks since I've done one of these, and to be fair, I can't believe I've never talked about this before. I've touched upon it very, very briefly, literally a statement here or there, followed up immediately with the word allegedly, about copying games when I was a kid. But the thing is, if you're of my generation, and not just for the ZX Spectrum, but for all tape-based systems back then, piracy was an absolutely massive deal. Although we didn't necessarily think we were doing anything wrong. I guess you can't see the sort of repercussions of your actions when you're a child, and all you're doing is popping an original tape in on your double tape stereo, or in our case, our dad's. Oh, it's hi-fi MIDI station. Remember those? Record player on top, two tapes, graphic equalizers, gap at the bottom for your records and your tapes, wooden frame, glass door. Oh, they should bring those back, or maybe they have. Anyway, yeah, we didn't really think we were doing anything wrong when we were doing this, but then you can't see the repercussions that, would happen to all the people who made these games, the individuals, developing them for the software companies and things like that. I mean, as an adult, particularly because we see the indie sort of games coming out these days and all the modern systems, we would probably be far more aware of it. But as a kid now, in my defence, I got a ZX Spectrum. Dad bought us a ZX Spectrum 48K rubber mat in 1982. So we're probably not going to understand the repercussions of our actions. Anyway, initially we never really knew you could do this, or it was a thing. Sure, this Spectrum we got given to us had a bunch of games with it, and some of them were on C60 cassettes with brief descriptions in the actual, inside of the cassette box. Because these were blank tapes with inlays that you could write on, masking tape in one case on the side to go over the top where the game or the tape would have more games re-recorded on the top. For some reason, again, I was 6, 7, I thought it was just a case of there must be some special magical machine you use to duplicate or produce these games. I didn't know, because at the time our Spectrum was in the front room, that the answer to all our software problems and dreams was behind us with my dad's MIDI hi-fi center. So it's funny because obviously it was more so when I was at primary school, because my gaming of choice when I was at secondary school was pretty much, once I got into year 2, year 3, was Master System, Mega Drive and stuff like that, and then obviously Super Famicom. But at primary school, piracy, well, we didn't call it piracy. Piracy is a harsh word for me for what we were doing. Again, we didn't really understand the repercussions of our actions. Copying, borrowing off your mates and copying. But yeah, it was fantastic. We still bought games. We still bought a lot of games, but we supplemented those games by, lending them to mates, borrowing theirs, copying them, returning them. And the rule was simple. You didn't just give your mate a game you had spent money on. No. You had to get something in return. It was swapsies. And obviously, if you stop to think about it now, Spectrum, Amstrad, Commodore, Dragon 32, Acorn, BBC, no one had MSXs in this country, I think. If you start to add up the sheer number of systems and the big titles across all these systems from specific software houses, it must have made a big deal to them. It absolutely must have. Hence the fact that there were adverts in magazines, and you can buy it on t-shirts now, and it says, "Home copying is destroying the software industry," and it had a picture of 2 tapes on it. I really should own one of those shirts, but it was just a great experience. I mean, we still bought games. We still bought games because there were certain games you wanted to have the originals of. They came in lovely boxes like Robocop and Batman, and obviously with artwork by the legendary Bob Wakeland, things like Renegade, Target Renegade, Gallivant, and things like that. You wanted to have a proper case. It was almost like you bought the games you really wanted. Then the ones that weren't quite up with what you wanted to buy would be when you would go to school, and at lunchtime and first break, And in those days, we had a third break, didn't we? My God, that was living. You talk to your buddies and you'd arrange deals, which is, all right, so you'd make lists of your games, you give them to your mates, and then you bring in the next day a certain number of games for them, they bring a certain number in for you, and then you tape them off. And however long, it took to take them off would be however long you borrowed them, and then you'd send them back. You never even played them first, you just tape them. It was like, it was like a business arrangement, even though you were like 7, in and out, get it done as quickly as possible. But it was a big thing. And we must have had hundreds and hundreds of taped games, seriously. And then we had pen pal mates. We used to go on holidays, I say, to that place, Blue Anchor caravan site, and we became mates with a kiddie in a caravan that was just 2 up from us, and he had a ZX Spectrum too, and he had a whole bunch of games we never even thought about, like the Gargoyle games, remember Marsport, Dundalk, is that how you pronounce it? I can't even pronounce Tin Anog. I can't, sorry if you're Irish. But yeah, so we would make tapes and then we would send them to each other in parcels. I think he lived in Glasgow. And he was our pen pal for like 2 years, sending tapes through the post. It was so much fun. As I said, we still bought games, but I wouldn't say we supplemented. We had way more tape than we did original. But it was exciting. It was absolutely exciting. I don't know if anyone had to do this without a hi-fi sensor or tape-to-tape, stereo, and had to do it by connecting 2 cassette recorders together, like the ones you would use to load the games on your system, because I heard that some of my mates back then did, and then you had to get really stick the screwdriver in the hole when you put the tape jacks up like that and play with the heads and stuff like that. But all I remember was, and the thing is, if you weren't supposed to, well, you weren't supposed to, but companies kind of they took advantage of this, with the products that they sold. You could go into Boots and you could go into WH Smith's, and this is what we bought. And they would sell you C15 cassettes. Basically, a cassette tape that only had 7.5 minutes on each side. Now, before people say, well, they could be used for dictatapes and stuff like that, or very small mixtapes. Bollocks, you're not going to buy a C15 for a dictatape. You're just going to buy a C60, in case you overran. But for games, it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect, more so in the original early days before sort of multi-loaders came in. Because I know we all had, you'd have music tapes, wouldn't you, mixtapes, but doing mixtapes like that with games is when it started to get a little bit kind of complicated, because you'd have to start writing the games down, then listing next to each game how long it was, and then you would have to find it on a tape. And we did this, because some came with our original Spectrum like that. And if you didn't have a counter on your tape, and we still persevered and did this, it was bloody murder, trying to find a specific gap between games, of silence, not when it just went boo, boo, because you would have a gap of silence there before it went boo, boo. That is the crappiest impression of a Spectrum ever. I am very much aware of that. But yeah, and we would do it. But finding, or separating out games, or finding the start and end of games on a C60 was a fucking nightmare. So C15s were perfect. So these tapes were sold for no other reason than tape to taping. So like I said, the great things were you get your list of your mates at school. You get so many games to play. These C15s would come in packs of 5. They were really cheap. We didn't care about covers. It's not like piracy a few years later on PlayStation and stuff like that, where you could buy them with proper printed up covers. I'm sure you could if you looked hard enough, but we weren't worried about that. It was just about, getting the game to play, writing clearly on the spine and on the top of the tape. And obviously, great thing about C15s was 1 game each side of the tape. When you have big fat 1 to 8K games like that and stuff like that, I don't think we really bothered so much on tape to taping. But what I do remember as a kid, because this is the early 80s and it's archaic, copy protection is archaic. But they tried a whole bunch of things, and usually, more often than not, you could circumvent it and get your way around it. Or they tried really hard. They just made someone who spent all their money on an original game, they just made it fucking unusable. Lens lock on Ace. But we'll get to that. So, we amassed this massive collection of games that we tape to tape and stuff like that. Again, we still bought games, but as I just mentioned, our copy ones were vastly eclipsing in size the ones that we actually bought. But then these manufacturers of games started introducing more and more things to try and stop you from taping them. Ultimate Play the Game, their first batch of games was 16K, and 16K, then a couple of 48K, but their first batch of games are, at least on the Spectrum, were £5.50, stuff like Trans Am, Attic Attack, and was it, no, Pedro was Imagine, but you know the ones I'm talking about. And so they figured if they make their game really, really expensive, and I can see the logic in this, I have no idea why I just went like that, but I did deal with it. They then, so we're talking 1983, 84, their games, they came in absolutely amazing big cardboard boxes with beautiful, beautiful art design, but that still doesn't justify the price. They were £10. They were £10 in 83, 84. That is a lot of money for a game which is specifically the pursuit of a child. Let's be honest. And their sort of thinking was, if you dropped a tenner on a game, you aren't lending it to your mates. You aren't lending it to your mates for them to get it for free. And I can see some form of logic in that, but clearly it didn't work. Because we ended up with a whole bunch of their big cardboard box games. And most of these games were released on budget. When Kix, which was US Gold's budget label, and US Gold obviously acquired Ultimate Play the game. Acquired, but it was different people making the games and they weren't as good, but the point being, never mind. So, yeah, we still ended up with some of these. So someone at school must have lent these to us, you know, knowing that well, possibly their dad dropped a tenner on it. If their dad dropped a tenner on it, they probably wouldn't really care. But I can see the thinking behind that. And then you get these colour charts. Jet Set Willy, who remembers Jet Set Willy? You would get a card, and there'll be a load of colours across a certain number of lines, all fading across like that, you know, like a rainbow, and going down as well like that. And you'd have like A to Z in, I don't know, 1 to 100 or something. It's been years since I've seen this. It's been absolutely years. And you'd load the game in. I'm pretty sure this was Jet Set Willy. And then it would ask you for, every time you loaded it was random. It would ask you for, it'll give you a coordinate, A 26 or something like that. And you would have to give you a bunch of coordinates, and then you'd have to type in the colour that was in each of the one grids. Now, we got a copy of, we had the original Jet Set Willy, so maybe it wasn't that game, but we had one of these games. Maybe it was a Software Projects game. And obviously took this person a lot of time to make the original master up of these, but then you would just photocopy a load of them, because, well, more expensive than it was later years. Obviously, photocopying has always been reasonably cheap. He would just take a piece of grid paper like you would get in like a maths book, and he would just literally number it and letter it according to, it was a lot bigger, according to the little one that was, you know, obviously full colour that came with the game. And he would write the colour in each and every single square and fill the entire thing up. So obviously initially it would have taken him a while, but then he just banged it out with photocopies, and there you go. Yeah, I mean, they must have realised that if people were making money out of this, all us kids weren't, you know, whether or not, you know, we were hurting the software industry, and I have no doubt we were, but again, I was 7, did not see the impact of what we were doing. They must have thought that surely that was going to be cracked. That was an easy one. I do remember Monty Python's Flying Circus. It gave you a list of cheeses. When I found a ROM of it a few years ago to do a gameplay, I had to download or find on the internet the pictures and the list of cheeses, because it would ask you for which is Leicester and stuff like this, and you would have to click on the cheese. But essentially, again, that could have just been photocopied. So I'm wondering if that was more just a bit of tongue-in-cheek, half-assed attempt at software protection, but keeping in line with what Monty Python was. But yeah, so then there were ones you get a full massive manual, and it would ask you, again, it was randomly generated when you loaded the game in. It would ask you for, it would go, right, page 27, line 13, word 34, and you would type it in. You kind of quite advanced, I guess that was, you know. Well, I mean, I don't know, I didn't program back then. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a simple program that would generate this and know exactly what word you were typing. And maybe there was only a certain number, you know, it wasn't infinitely generating a word, different word in place. I mean, if you had one of these software protection books, manuals, or processes, I should say, on a tape, I'd love you to let me know, but they were all, you know, you could circumvent them. We never circumvented them, we were children. You know, that was the job of the people who probably did make money from this. But the one that was absolutely, it was infamous for, and we borrowed this game, an original game. We had no intention of recording it because we just wanted to play it because it was a flight simulator, Ace. I want to say it's by Martech, but I don't think it was. Was it Ace of the Aces? No, that was a US Gold game. The Ace was like a modern fighter jet game, even though it's 40 years ago. So, yeah, we just wanted to play it. borrowed off a kid at school called George Croker. I still remember this. It was gutted when I took it back. He said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Never got to play it, and I refuse to believe that you did." But this was infamous, and they weren't the only people, or this game wasn't the only game to come with this thing. It was called a lens lock, I believe. Look it up. It was a piece of black plastic with legs, and you would fold it like that, and there was clear plastic in the middle with something done. I always remember it being like 2 strokes or something like that. And when you loaded your game, before you got into the game, there would be a piece of writing or something, and it would ask you to put this. You'd literally put it physically onto your TV. So obviously you could only use this if you had a colour telly. Physically onto the TV, and you squint at this, and apparently whatever they did, these 2 marks or frosted crap piece of plastic glass would magically make the words reveal themselves, and you type them in, and you get to play the game. And you only had a certain number of times to do it. And I tried many occasions. So did my my brothers. We even asked my dad, my mum, to see if they could see it. And we could never ever work out what the words were. And we never got to play that game. Shame. Got really good reviews in all the Spectrum magazines. So I wonder, they were probably sent review copies that didn't come with a lens lock. Can't remember what other games came with it. If you can, let me know. But could you do it? Could you do it? Could I? Fuck. As a 7, 8, 9-year-old kid. But it's weird when you think back, or I at least think back to my early days of gaming, and specifically school and break time and just copying games, even though we physically didn't do it at school, though I hear stories that some people did. They went hand in hand, giving lists of your games to your mates. Again, it was never for money. The fact that you were getting these games for free, obviously ugly, was costing someone money. I mean, I don't know how much it took from these industries, but the fact that the Spectrum, the last game, the last official non-homebrew piece of software on the ZX Spectrum was Nigel Mansell in 1993 by Gremlin Graphics. So it obviously rode this storm out, but it must have deprived and frustrated these software houses, or deprived them of a lot of money and frustrated them a great deal. Particularly when you remember that a lot of these people writing games for these companies were doing it out of their bedrooms, and yeah, they're almost indie, basically like it is now. But yeah, I have such warm fuzzy memories of copying tape to tape gaming. Sat there for hours, just click, click, play, click, record. Sat there with the headphones on, so when it was ended, so you'd stop it, because if it was really short, despite what I said about having loads of games on a C60, if it was really short, you could put a second game on the same side of a C15, because you only had 2 games. Even Thicky Holden back then could have got away with that, but you would have headphones listening to fax noise, basically. But yeah, just tape after tape after tape after tape, and then returning the games to the kid at school. As I said, it was across every format. I mean, sometimes they tried to introduce technology physically directly into the tape, didn't they? And wasn't I can't remember. Not that you had. When they changed the loading, I'm having a complete brain fart. This is what I should do, research for these things, but I can't be asked. I like to sit down and just talk and chew the cud. There was a name after a while when you didn't see the colour, the blue and red and the yellow and blue colour at the side. It was completely black, and it made a really shrill noise, and it was called something else as a loading system, and apparently it was uncopyable. It wasn't uncopyable. I just wonder if they just did that to put it out there and made it look different, so kids would shit their pants and not even attempt to do it, because I guess at this point they were just clutching at straws. Or maybe it was. I cannot think what it's called. It was something loader. Maybe it wasn't just a Spectrum thing. If you can remember what it is, by all means, I can't be asked to Google it. But I just have such warm, fuzzy nostalgic memories of tape to taping, increasing your software collection, massively fold, going to Smiths and Boots and buying their own brand C15s and packs of 5s, packs of 10, sending parcels across country, which couldn't have been cheap in those days. And yeah, it was. This is why you never really. It's got bored of gaming, because you could you couldn't get off the second level. Next. Which is weird, because years later when you started going to markets and buying copies for PlayStation and PlayStation 2 was the reason I never actually finished the game. I guess that was born in the early 80s, thanks to copying games from kids at school on the ZX Spectrum. Wow, good times. And as I said, there was a comic strip, wasn't there? One company tried to scare kids. Was it called Fact or Fast or something? And it was £100 reward for anyone who grasses up someone who's pirating games that leads to a prosecution. I can only imagine. I'm pretty sure in the last panel the person was breaking the fourth wall and pointing at you. I can only imagine the sheer number of kids who grassed their mates up simply because they thought they'd get £100. And this was not the people these, I don't know, bodies would go after, was it? There's no way they're going to get prosecution from a 7-year-old. And also, I do wonder more often than not, was that just scare tactics to make people shit their pants? Anyway, I would love to know your memories of tape to taping on whatever system you have. And, you know, was it the same thing? Lists traded at school, you know, never for money, just always one tape for another tape. You always swapped. You never gave out freebies, maybe one or two to your friends. But yeah, I'd love to know what you think, because tape to taping was a massive part of my childhood, and it was another reason that I have such warm, fuzzy memories of the ZX Spectrum. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for watching.